Welcome to Mindless Entertainment. My name is Jesse Milestone, and once again, I am joined by the incredible Richard Chu, the amazing editor of Star Wars. Yes, that one, 1977. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The Conversation. If you tuned in last week, you heard him talk about all of those wonderful features. But his career doesn't stop there. In fact, it barely even begins there. So, Richard, how are you today?
I am well, thanks. Given the state of the world and COVID and people staying at home, I'm happy I'm healthy and that I have groceries in the fridge.
Exactly. That's all. That's all I really ask for these days. We have both here, so we have no complaints. And as you know, I'm flanked by at least 2 cats right now. We'll see who else joins us. So I'm extra cozy for today's adventure. I'm really excited because where we left things last week, you'd won this amazing Academy Award for doing Star Wars. You're really at that launching point of your career, but to that point, you've been hanging out, at American Zoetrope up in the Bay Area, hanging out with these incredible filmmakers, just getting their starts. And so where do we go from here?
Well, I finally got the call to Hollywood. And Hollywood, even though geographically it's located in Los Angeles, it's so different from the Los Angeles that I grew up in, because I grew up inner city, going to public schools, so when I got the call from Jack Nicholson's camp, from his team, to see if I would be interested in editing a Western that Jack was going to star and direct in Mexico. You can imagine my surprise, because I was, kind of struggling in the Bay Area, even though I had worked on The Conversation, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and Star Wars. They were kind of, I spent, months of unemployment in between those. So it's the Bay Area in the mid-'70s was not a hotbed of feature filmmaking. So I had met Jack Nicholson on the set in Salem, Oregon, when we were working on One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So I was quite surprised when I got this call from him, even though he had his team had sent me a different script, a different Western, before Going South came up. Going South was something that he was going to direct in Mexico, and it was like a romantic comedy, really. And it was such a different experience for me, because coming to Hollywood meant I was going to get a chance to work with a celebrity, an international celebrity. And I hadn't been around international celebrities, especially with that kind of visibility, when Jack Nicholson was at his prime. In the 70s, because, by the time he did Cuckoo's Nest, he had come off of 5 Easy Pieces, The Last Detail, Chinatown, and then in Cuckoo's Nest, he won an Oscar, So he was going to direct this movie with a bunch of young stars, but young actors. So, of course, I took him up on that, but I didn't end up actually working in Hollywood. I had to join him in Durango, Mexico, which was at that time the location that many Hollywood Westerns were shot in, because of the sets that had been built there. So when I got to meet there working on that picture, people that were just beginning to find some recognition because of television. So John Belushi was just on Saturday Night Live at that time, and he would fly in and out. He would come in on Mondays from New York, and then on Fridays he would leave to go back to do Saturday Night Live.
That must have been insane.
Yeah, and then, of course, this was the debut for Mary Steenburgen, who hadn't been in any movies prior. And Jack just had a good eye. He and his producing partner, Harry Gittes, they found this really incredible cast who nobody knew at the time, even though Jack met on the set of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Danny DeVito, Christopher Lloyd. So those guys he cast also in Going South. So when I got to Durango, I mean, we were all about the same age at that time, you know, and kind of new to the business. And I just remember that, you know, Jack had, like a lot of prominent people, they like to hold court.
Yep.
So
Oh yeah.
Jack held a lot of dinner. I
Mhm.
wouldn't call it parties, but just dinners. He would host a lot of dinners in his house, which was in location in Durango. And I had to set up editing. The house was large enough where I could set up editing rooms,
Ha!
you know, in his house, kind of across the hall from his master bedroom. And then of course, there's the kitchen, there's the dining room and stuff. So every few nights, he would invite me to stay to have dinner
Mhm.
the cast, and it was just an incredible, you know, time for me being this you know, young person that's not used to being around actors for one thing, to be at the dinner table where these guys would, you know, tell jokes.
And
But
everyone's trying
basically, it was Jack, you know, holding
to.
court,
Oh
and
yeah. I'm.
listen to him. And he really surprised me because it was the first time I got to be around an international celebrity to see what he's like. And even though he was supposedly unschooled or uneducated, he was just so well read. And he just kind of knew so much, or at least let's put it this way, he had opinions about so much of everything. His opinions were, you know, well founded,
Yeah.
but you know, he had opinions on everything.
That's
But
funny.
it took some time for me to get used to because he was that kind of, especially since he's himself, he's not playing a role, he's not playing a character, he's just being him,
Yeah.
that he would switch topics in the middle of sentences so that it was hard for me sometimes to keep track or at least to follow what he was talking about because in the middle of a sentence he would switch from topic A to topic B, and then by the next paragraph we're in topic C and we're talking
It,
about sports,
it's
politics, movies, art, and you know, and he would, because he knew so many of these people, he would refer to them by their first names, and it was kind of hard for me, you know, being this, you know, kind of unsophisticated guy, and even though I'd gone to school, I didn't know all these people,
wow.
just to follow along.
I bet
So
it really tickled him to do that too. I bet it was so fun for him to just be like talking about his life and these people that he knows and all this stuff. Was he ever not on? Were there any moments where like you could see through the cracks, or he would let the, you know, because that's always got that impression. You know, he plays kind of himself, so there's always, he is one of the few actors of his caliber that's really gotten away with the mask for as long as he has. Most actors of his caliber really peel it away and let you see underneath, and he so rarely does. So when you know, see him without the camera, are there any more moments where he lets that go, or is he really just on all the time?
I mean, yeah, I mean, he was on because, you know, not just in my presence, but because uh, I was around him usually with a lot of other people. It was
Yeah,
not like it was just he and me, although later on, which I'll dissolve to when we were in the cutting room alone, but when we were on location in Mexico during those 3 or 4 months, there are just so many people around. And when you're shooting a picture, you have to have, you know, your line producer, your production designer, your cameraman, and you know, he was just he was the driving force behind this movie. I mean, the movie would not have gotten made
yeah,
if it weren't for him, because it was Paramount Studio. They said, "Oh, Jack, you've made so much money for us. You know that you want to do this little western? Sure, go ahead. You know, go to Mexico. You know, cast who you want. Yeah, have fun." So you know, that's what ended up it being. You know, we had. I mean, he was able to get such terrific people. I don't even know how I ended up in the mix, but he got us the DP, Nestor Almendros.
Mhm.
And Nestor Almendros, for those that may have forgotten who he is, he's born in Cuba, lived in France, and became this prominent cameraman for a lot of the French New Wave films.
yeah,
And then right prior to working on Going South with us, he had just shot for Terry Malick, Days of Heaven.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That,
So,
that movie.
I got to hear his stories as well, right? But
Yeah.
the one moment that I have to tell a story about was that a lot of times Jack would ask me to visit the set, but the set was like an hour drive away from town, which was where he lived and where the editing was set up, at
Yeah,
his house.
of course.
So to go out there, I would have to go out with him at the beginning of the day, and he had a driver in his RV, and we'd go out for the day. And one time, as we were coming back, there was as passengers, Nestor and myself and Jack, and it started to rain. And Jack said, "Oh, this is perfect. Hey, you guys, you have to come up and do this, man. This is such a groove." So he had the driver, Cotton, his name was, "Cotton, stop." And stopped in the middle of this highway in Mexico. Uh, and he said, get out, let's get out. And it's raining. And we followed him. He said, "Come with me." We climb up the ladder to the roof of the RV. And he had us lay down and hook our arms together, lay down, hook our arms together on the top of this RV, and he said, "Cotton, go!" So Cotton starts this RV, and we start going down the road, and this rain started pelting our faces,
Oh my God.
like little bullets or
Yeah.
needles, say like little needles. I of course never experienced anything like that, but Jack thought it was great. I mean, he just says, "Isn't this great?" He's just smiling, and he says, "Raise your hand up."
Oh my God.
So our heads, or our face would like face the rain
Oh
as
my,
these raindrops are like needling into our face. And,
oh my
it
God.
was kind of like that was one of my moments. Like, this guy, I don't know, man. This is not what I expected. This is not what I signed up for, to get like needles of rain in my face.
That's exactly what obviously I have history on my side, but knowing everything that I know about him, that's exactly what I would expect from a film shoot with Jack Nicholson. Oh my God. That's so
Yeah,
wild.
and then John Belushi was like a whole other mix of energy
Oh God, yeah.
that because he would come in, for dinner sometimes, especially Sundays. When you work on location, you work 6 days a week, and then Sundays your day off, and
Yeah.
then that's when Jack had really a party,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
Belushi was into all kinds of intoxicating substances, and he made it a point one afternoon, on a Sunday afternoon, he came back, and for some reason he kind of liked me, and he says, "Jude, come on out of here." And cast members or any of us were forbidden to drive in Mexico because we didn't have
Mhm.
insurance
Mhm.
and,
Mhm.
and cast insurance or any kind of legal stuff.
Yeah.
But he had somehow got a car, and he had gone somewhere, and he'd come back, and he said, "Shoot, come out here, man, look what I got. I got this mezcal,
Oh
on the
yes.
road." And those in brown paper bags, he had like 2 mayonnaise jars full of this clear liquid that he claimed was mezcal.
Oh
And he
God.
was, he was always trying to get us to drink or smoke or do whatever he was doing because he wanted to share,
Of course. Of
whatever
course.
he was enjoying. So he's, "You
Yeah.
gotta try some of this," And I'm looking at, who knows what I'm drinking here. And of course, I had a sip, and then he would bring it in, to share with everybody.
Yep.
And, it was just kind of really intoxicating time, so to speak, metaphorically, to be
Yeah.
with all these people.
Oh yeah, God, I can only imagine. That was now. Would you have moments like where Belushi and Jack Nicholson were trying to like one up each other, be the star? I mean, because they're both really center of attention kind of guys. Would you get stuff like that? Like everyone trying to.
Belushi, I guess, had on another occasion, he must have really been gotten out of hand because he was banished from the set. He was sent back
Oh
from the
no!
set, and he was so angry that instead of going back to the hotel room, because he had done things like in the middle of the night in our hotel, because the cast and the crew kind of stayed at the same motel. He emptied some fire extinguisher, in the hallway.
Oh my God.
Hotel, and it kind of, got everybody upset of the hotel staff, of course. So he would do stuff like that. So this one time, he was banished from the set, and he had come, instead of going back to the hotel, he came over to Jack's, and he was drunk, and he was sick. He was nauseous. And the one producer, Harry Gittes, was trying to take care of John, and said, "Okay, John, you got to go sleep it off." So instead of going out to the living room to sleep on the couch, Belushi chose to go and sleep on Jack's bed.
Of course he did.
Of course. So he would go into Jack's bedroom, and then I'm working, across the hall with my assistant, and I hear somebody throw up.
Oh God.
So I said, Harry, Harry is in the other room. Harry, I think John is sick. And then, I hear Harry kind of walk across and look in the bedroom and say, "Oh God, John, what the fuck are you doing?" And I guess, Belushi had thrown up on the floor next to, Jack's bed. So this kind of stuff that, in my humble upbringing, I've never seen happen, where all these shenanigans would be going on. And that was what coming to Hollywood through Mexico was like.
Wow. Now I'm sure there were points, too, with in the Bay Area where you guys would party or celebrate and stuff like that. But I imagine it's just like a completely different animal when you just.
In the Bay Area, I mean, working with Francis and Walter. I mean, Walter's a really sober guy.
Yeah.
And I don't even think I've ever had a drink with Walter during that time.
Well.
And Cuckoo's Nest, I know Milos partied, but not with me. And then on Star Wars, George is a teetotaler, and we never partied there, so I didn't see any of that. And of course, that was my introduction to the indulgence of Hollywood.
What an introduction, too! Wow, I mean, really, way to go from 0 to about 150. That's
yeah, and that was just in Mexico. That wasn't even like what it was like when we returned home, to Hollywood. I mean, I'm telling stories, and I might as well tell them because it was like, for me, it was just so unusual.
Yeah.
So when we wrapped and returned to Hollywood, Paramount Studios, which was back in the picture, wanted us to work on the studio lot because that's when they can keep control. And during all the decades that I worked on movies, studios would always want you to edit the movie, on the lot. Yep. And then the more powerful you were as a director or as a producer, you can say, "No, I'm going to do it where I want to do it." Uh-huh. So first, when we got back from Durango, Mexico, the studio put us in, had us set up editing rooms, and it happened to be in the old dressing room of the Lucille Ball. So I was like, this is kind of cool, because there was the whole makeup chair, which is like a barber's chair, and the mirror was all there.
Oh, wow.
So, that was, and I really kind of like that because it was so convenient, because there's a commissary, there were restaurants off the lot, you can, on Melrose Avenue that you can walk to. And it was just, it was really good. And it was the Hollywood that I never knew about when I was a kid growing up in LA.
Yeah.
But Jack, of course, being, a heavyweight, said to studio, "No, I'm not going to work on the lot. We're going to edit up at my place." So, because he was Jack, we got to edit up at his place, which is his house in this compound where Marlon Brando, is in the house next door, and Jack lived in one house, and then there's a third house, which was a so-called guest house. And we got to set up editing rooms there. And then he brought in 2 other editors because he wanted to, have like a whole team that he's in charge of. I mean, it wasn't enough just to have one guy, one editor. He did give me the chance to put together the first cut. Mm-hmm. So I put together the first cut based on the script, and he called me into the office and he said, "Richard, you know, I always wanted to work with a bunch of guys, and I can't do it, Jack." And he says, I want to bring in, Bud Mullen. You know, Bud actually, he used to cut I Love Lucy. So, you know, he'd be good for this comedy. And I'm bringing this other young guy named John Beck. And, you know, and I want us to work together. And we set up in this house, different bedrooms and living rooms in the third house. But, you know, it's up in Mulholland Drive, which is at least a half hour away from any restaurants and stuff. And it's like, what are we going to do for food, you know? It just so happened that my first assistant, named Terry Gustafson, was a great cook.
That's awesome.
We lucked out. And he said, like at 11 o'clock in the morning, he said, "Richard, I can't put away trims any longer. I got to make lunch."
Awesome.
And he would actually go roast a couple of chickens, or he would make stuff. He would make stuff from scratch. He would be chopping up stuff.
I bet it was an awesome kitchen too.
So lucky. I mean, because certainly when I interviewed him, it was more like, you know, have you assisted movies and stuff? I never asked if he could cook, but it ended up that way. So that, but working with a celebrity director, in his case, also carried with it baggage that I didn't anticipate, because he had so many friends to impress. So he had, of course, director friends, producer friends, acting friends, that he wanted to show that he could direct a movie.
Of course.
So for weeks on end, on Friday nights, and this became a pattern where he would say, at least to me, "Richard, could you just put a reel 6 and leave it there? So I have the pro coming over I just want to show him reel 6. And the pro was his nickname for Warren Beatty.
Wow.
Because sometimes I would answer the phone at the house, and we used to, of course, just have landlines. And he would say, I would pick up the phone, and his voice would say, "Is Semi there?" Semi. Who's that? I said, "Jack, man." I said, "Oh, can I tell him who's calling?" "The pro." So I said, "Jack, do you know somebody here named the pro?" He said, "Oh, that's Warren." So Warren Beatty was the pro and Jack was Semi, because that was their names for each other in relation to how they can seduce women.
That's unbelievable. No.
It was like, you know, I'm getting this insight into a whole other world. There's pro and Semi. And then on other weekends, he would say, "Richard, leave up reel 7 because I have Hal coming over." So he would have Hal Ashby come over, and then he would have Bob Rafelson, and he would have, I don't know, different people. And of course, on Monday mornings, he would have a whole slew of notes. So we just because he had this, he didn't have a deadline, about when he had to finish this. But it was a way for him to carry on a dialogue and hang out with his friends from the weekend and do whatever they did while they were watching Reel 7, And it was I don't know, it was really quite an initiation, which is unlike any others that I had coming to work in Hollywood with a celebrity.
Yeah, that sounds just unreal. I mean, wow. And it sounds like, though, he, I was enamored with the idea of building his team to do all this stuff. So was he very persnickety about what was done in the editing room? Obviously, it sounds like coming back with notes and whatnot. He definitely wanted to be involved in the process, but was he someone who knew a lot about the process and was able to sort of communicate that really well? Or does he sort of just have these big ideas and he'd sort of give you all the notes and say, "All right, fix it"?
Well, surprisingly, as talkative and how he held court, the aesthetics. You know, when he was trying to maybe explain, you know, a sequence or a scene, what he wanted me to change, it wasn't really specific in terms of his description of what he wanted to change. He would, for instance, he would really act out that character's part. He says, "Oh, you know, Mary, can you just make it so like Mary's doing, Mary Steenburgen, that she's doing this?" So he would stand up and he would walk around the room as if he were doing the scene as Mary Steenburgen's character, you know, with beats and almost kind of mimicking her deliveries, you know, and then he would, you know, dash over to the other part of the room, you know, being his character, you know, delivering his line, and he would kind of give it this ping pong back and forth, delivering the lines of the characters in the scene. So that was new to me, you know, like, oh, I never thought about that in that way.
I've always heard of him as being one of those actors that's great to work with on set because, you know, talk about a lot of celebrities who, if you're working with a lesser actor, they won't even be there when you're doing your close-ups. They'll just have you read with the line reader and stuff like that. I've always heard of him as being one of the people who will be there and give his all with all of his readings. I love hearing that he's doing that with even not in the readings, but just he's that living in the film, even when just trying to communicate the cuts and stuff. That's so fun.
Yeah, because I had never been around a real actor.
Yeah.
You know, and actors are like musicians. You know, musicians think differently. Their world is different. They approach the world differently. And actors, as I learned, are they're not similar to musicians, but they have their own take on the world and how they arrange things, how stories they tell, and you know, like they think it's fun. They have rain in your face on top of an RV. I mean, you know, what sane person, you know, would like that?
We are a little bit of an unstable bunch. I say that, you know, as an actor. Yeah. No, it's definitely true. And it's cool because there are certain ones like that, personalities. You see it a lot. The comedians tend to really be like this more where that spin, that worldview becomes everything. It sounds like Jack Nicholson's really one of these people where you build your own world. And when you live in that world and when you invite other people into it, they really have to live in your rules.
That's right. You have to subscribe to your world. And
exactly.
I noticed after, you know, maybe like in Mexico, after like 3 weeks of my being a guest at the dinner table, I was no longer invited. You know, so like at the end of the day, instead of him asking me to stay for dinner, it was like, bye, you know, I have some people coming over. I'll see you guys tomorrow. So, you know, there's this, I wore my welcome out or something, you know, or I probably didn't contribute enough.
We need these seats for someone else now. So someone who's going to tell a funnier joke or get a little drunker and wilder and maybe fall asleep in their pasta.
Yeah, because he had, you know, he would bring in writers, you know, from the States, you know, like Jim Harrison was a novelist. You know, he would, you know, he kind of filled maybe my seat at the table, and then he would have somebody else come in. You know, I mean, it was fine. I mean, it was really terrific. You know, I'm not Jim Harrison. And the same thing happened, like I was saying, back at his house in Mulholland Drive.
Yep. Wow. And
that
so
was my initiation to that world. I mean, there are different worlds, you know, they're like different countries.
Yeah, and it's just kind of like learning the customs and cultures, and then you walk out of one room into a different one. You're in someone else's universe, and the rules are completely different. That must be really trippy. Imagine, you know, having to kind of. I'm assuming you have your own language. You're a creative as well, and so you have your own vision and language and a way that you work. Were there any other people, you know, throughout your career where you felt like there was that like you had to maybe you had to either learn their language or they had to learn yours in order to get on the same page? Where you just, you know?
Yeah, you know, I don't mean to say that all actors are crazy and as
We are.
as
It's
Jack.
okay.
2 years later, I got to work on this film called My Favorite Year, which is a comedy that's based on 1950s live television. It was the executive producer was Mel Brooks, and the director was Richard Benjamin. And Richard Benjamin who, although a generation younger than Brooks, my favorite year was this Richard Benjamin's first movie to direct. So
Yeah.
I didn't know what to expect because of how crazy it was to work with Jack. But Richard, just to show you a counter example of not how all actors are a little manic. He was such a reasonable guy that was linear in thinking, descriptive, reflective.
Yeah.
He spoke in a way that I understood and could follow. You know, in fact, he was a little maybe obsessive compulsive because I remember one morning when he came into the editing room during my favorite year, he was really upset because he scratched his Mercedes backing out of the driveway.
Mm-hmm.
And since he was so upset, I thought, well, how bad is it? He said, well, come on out and I'll show you. So we went, and this was at the old MGM studio lot, which is now Sony.
Yep.
And he had this little Mercedes coupe black. And I was looking at the side. I couldn't even see the scratch. And I said, where's the scratch, Richard? He says, well, come down here. And he kind of leaned down on one knee to the side of the car and angled himself so like if you kind of looked just right at a certain angle where the light could catch it, you would see the little scratch, down the side. So,
God.
He's more my kind of guy, in terms of attention to detail. And I mean, we were able to speak the same language and understood the aesthetics of how to refine a scene.
Yeah, that's neat. I imagine there's a lot of value in both. I'm sure it's really easy when you get to work with someone who speaks your language, but I'm sure when it's someone who's really completely alien, it's always at the very least it makes good stories, right? And at the best, learn it. And the flip of it is sometimes it's a new perspective. Sometimes you get a different way of looking at that.
Well, working with some of these directors who are actually actors and that make the transition to directing or just directing because they have the allowance to do that. I lost my train of thought. That they appreciate, at least in Richard Benjamin's case, because he didn't call in all his friends to look at what we were doing. He really appreciated what editing can do to enhance a performance. Because the one thing that he was really impressed with what I was able to do was he was trying to keep my favorite year very fast paced. And he used to get upset that some of his actors didn't react quickly enough. Or so, without even speaking to me, I mean, just in terms of my mentality as an editor, I would be able to cut out a lot of pauses and overlap dialogue, and I would just speed up stuff. And he got really impressed with that, seeing that he was a new director. Like, wow, you really fixed that scene. And the only thing I did was just to take up all the pauses and overlap some of the dialogue, So I'm glad that he appreciated, that.
Yeah. It really becomes magic, when you don't, with the first time you see it happen, the first time you, especially having an experience as an actor or something else, putting it onto the camera and knowing what it looked like there and watching the dailies back and seeing what raw footage looks like. And then, handing it off to somebody, having them put it together into a proper scene and then seeing that back, when you know exactly what was given to them and then you see what comes back, that really is what is magic. People don't, I think a lot of people don't even understand or appreciate that level of wizardry that happens because you don't. If you're not on set, you don't see what a set looks like, what the cameras look like, or even again what just the raw footage looks like coming out of the camera. Just an entire take of just one shot, one establishing shot, one close up, one this, and then to put it all together to make something, and to not even realize how many little pieces. I mean, even digitally, it's so much, but then physically putting all these pieces, layering your sound, your image, different images, and putting all of it together to take it from just these ideas into a story. It really is magic.
Well, another example of an actor uh, not realizing or then eventually realizing what editing can do was that in the very same picture, My Favorite Year, which starred Peter O'Toole,
Mhm.
there's a sequence in My Favorite Year where it's kind of because Peter O'Toole is the main character in it, and he plays a Earl Flynn type of character in this story. And there's a sequence that's supposed to be a movie of him playing in a movie similar to like Robin Hood, the classic Robin Hood movie of Earl Flynn, where
Mhm.
there's a sword fight
Mhm.
and these guys are in round hose and old Elizabethan kind of costumes,
Mhm.
and there's a sword fight which I had put together. And when we showed it to Peter O'Toole, he was really unhappy with it because, as he said to Richard Benjamin and me, he says, you guys got this wrong. He says, a sword fight is like a dance, and we don't have the dance in there. And what he meant by that was we didn't have enough wide shots to show his footwork in it.
Ah,
Because, as you know, as a fencer,
yep.
so much of sword play is in your footwork.
Yes. Yeah.
So he was convinced that we didn't do justice to show the hard work he did in his footwork in this sword fight. So then he demanded to
Mhm.
work in the editing room with the editor, which happened to be me, to make right the sequence, this sword fighting sequence.
Oh my
So
God.
since he was like the big elephant in the room, the producers, including Mel Brooks and Richard Benjamin, said, okay, he has an off week, because we don't need him on the set. Let's just have him work with Richard in the editing room.
Wow.
So, here it is. Here, again, I'm just this kid from inner city LA. And I was a big admirer of Lawrence of Arabia,
Sure.
and right? And
Yeah, that's
I
gonna
get
be intimidating as
to
all get
work with Peter O'Toole, in a sword fight. Oh, yeah, bring it on, man. You know,
Mhm.
so, so we showed him the dailies. Well, first, we had to take apart.
Mhm.
I made a dupe of the cut as I had put it together that Richard Benjamin had liked and
Yeah.
approved.
Yeah.
And then we took apart actually the work print and then showed him the dailies because at that time in film, what you have to do is paste or tape back together everything in the original daily form.
Yeah.
And I would sit at the in the studio screening room with Peter, and of course Peter loved it. He got the attention. He got this whole theater, and he was just sitting with me and his assistant, who happened to be his cousin from Ireland, who
Oh,
would bring his special coffee and the Irish Times and his special croissant. And, I mean, he was utilizing all the perks he got as a star, a movie star.
of course.
And he would look at these reels over and over again, and he would make some notes. And then after a couple of days of this, because there's only like maybe 3 or 4 reels of dailies of that, maybe 2 hours at the most, but we watched it over a couple of days' time.
Oh
And
my
then he
God.
said, okay, I have an idea about how we can put this together. So, my task was to do what he wanted to do. So we started to work together in the cutting room. And of
Mhm.
course, he loved, having that kind of control, to have the editor of the movie that he's working on, that he can tell him what to do. And then this is when I began to realize that maybe I had some skills to work with people, because being an editor also means you have political skills
Mm.
to negotiate with who you're working with.
Yep.
That sometimes the people that want to tell you what to do don't really know, and you have to have the skills to be able to persuade them to do something else that's
Yep.
better for them.
Yep.
So that's what happened with my working with Peter. Was he would want me to use this or that, and I would show him that maybe you don't want to use this wide shot
Mm.
because let me just show it to you. And Peter was tall and he's very slender.
Mm. Mm.
And his leg. I mean, early on when I had first worked on the sequence with Richard Benjamin, I said, "Boy, Peter's legs are so skinny that he doesn't really fill out his hose very well. And they're a little baggy on him, and he doesn't look good in these wide shots because of these baggy. You can just see kind of some of the seams and the wrinkles and the folds in the round hose. I mean, it's no. I mean, the wardrobe person, I mean, did the best that she could, but still, you didn't want to see kind of like he looked great, except when you see his legs.
Little chicken legs.
So Peter, when he started working with me with the dailies, whenever we cut in these shots that he liked to show his dance, it wasn't so, flattering for him. And we would use the medium shot or the close-up or cut to the other guy, his opponent, or cut to the princess in distress, the damsel in distress. So by the time we got to Friday,
basically,
we basically ended up, with the exception of maybe 2 or 3 cuts, what I've done, in prior weeks. And he was so happy with it because he felt he had shaped this, and he wanted to show the producers and Richard Benjamin. He said, "Look, I've really improved this because I got a chance to work with the editor, and look at this." And then after we showed it to everybody, Richard Benjamin said to me, he says, "How different is that from what we had?" I said, "Well, other than for this, and this, it's the same thing." but Peter O'Toole was happy with it.
Of course.
So that was cool.
So you were able to, ultimately in the end, you were able to appease his pride by appealing to his vanity.
You summarized it really well. And that's what an editor does a lot.
So I love that. And of course you never tell Peter that, you barely changed anything. You let him think that he did all of this great work and all that.
Well, that's what a director does too on the set, I'm sure, when you're working with actors. You don't say, "Man, that stunk." You say, "Man, that was really good, but can you make this little adjustment?"
They actually even teach, this is how actors are coached to work with directors too, is that we don't ever get to say, unless you're really one of those big shots, as the actor, you never get to turn to the director and say, "Well, I didn't really feel right this way. Could I try it a different way?" Most directors don't want to hear that. So a lot of good acting teachers will teach you, when you go on set, if there's a choice you want to make that the director didn't ask for, just do it. At the worst, they're not going to like it, and they'll say, "I didn't like that take. Do it a different way." But I've known a lot of filmmaking is doing it, convincing somebody else that you're doing it their way when you're actually doing it your way, so that at the end you can show them that your way was better, but make them think it was their way the whole time.
Right. But in film, that was so much more difficult. You couldn't save versions easily, like you can with digital editing. All you put is Command S, and then you have that version, and then you make a copy of that, and then you can make multiple versions subsequently with all kinds of changes.
Exactly.
But when we were working with film and tape, it's so hard to preserve different versions.
Please tell us about Risky Business.
Okay, to segue into that, to introduce that, let me mention that how, you hear often actors talk about how they get stereotyped. Mm-hmm. So if they're a dramatic actor, they don't get cast in comedies.
Yep.
So, I mean, the same thing has applied, I think, in my experience, to editors. Mm-hmm. Because coming out of the 3 films that I did as part of a team, The Conversation, Cuckoo's Nest, and Star Wars, when I went to be interviewed for My Favorite Year, which they considered like, "Wait a second, we're looking for a comedy editor. But you've just done like dramatic stuff, and you've done this action picture. So how do we know that you can handle the timing of this that we need?" Mm-hmm. So I kind of faced that kind of prejudice, like I hadn't done that. So after having done My Favorite Year, which was a kind of a hit comedy for that time in 1980, when I think it came out in 1982, mm-hmm. This team of John Avnet and Paul Brickman, this is going to be Paul Brickman's directing debut. I had, I guess I was getting kind of a reputation that I could work with first-time directors.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, with Jack Nicholson on Going South, that was only his second movie that he was going to direct.
Yeah.
On My Favorite Year, that was the first movie that Richard Benjamin was going to direct. And then for Risky Business, Paul Brickman hadn't directed a movie before either. And because they thought, maybe there's a way that a knack that I have to work with new directors and help them. So, so when I was interviewed for that, I was really impressed with Paul's script, which was so different in terms of the comedy compared to My Favorite Year, which was written kind of, with a lot of shtick, like setup lines and punchlines, and it was kind of with that kind of beat. Whereas Paul's, when I read the script, I thought so much of it was so sly, and this was even before he cast it and shot it. I just read it, and it was just so fresh, and it felt so real. I mean, it didn't feel like there were people on the screen saying this. It felt like people that I knew that were behaving as their character. These young people that did this and that, and kind of looking for sex and stuff like that. I felt like this was also very familiar. Which, contrary to all the other prior movies that I worked on, it's not familiar. It's not familiar, to me in my world. So Risky Business appealed to me right away as a contemporary story, and I guess you can call it comedy, but it was done with a certain kind of tone, and I gravitated toward Paul because Paul had a different kind of personality too. He was not a Hollywood type of guy. He was from Chicago, the suburbs of Chicago, and he was much more of a brainy type of guy, than I had known previously, and we're closer in age together too. So I got hired to do that, and because they were shooting in Chicago and didn't have the budget to put me there, I was working in LA. And so, there was some issues with kind of with the young cast. I mean, there's Tom Cruise. This was his first starring role, and Rebecca De Mornay, that played his love interest there, hadn't been in a movie before. So, and Paul is not a really outgoing type of guy. I mean, he's kind of he is very subtle in his personality. He's not a performer, and he had some issues with how he could pull in or extract performances of Tom Cruise or Rebecca. So there was different levels of experience between what was in front of the camera and what was behind the camera. So for me, that was a challenge as an editor to be able to try to match the performance and the energy of what they were doing, to be able to convey what Paul's intention was on the page.
Yeah.
But I think the major thing that hit me was in the way that he had written this particular scene of when finally the Tom Cruise character and the Rebecca De Mornay character came together to have the first sex scene, even though all of it up to that point was a tease. The way that Paul had written it and the way that he initially shot it didn't match up. So I could see, because of his description, in fact, the way that he had written it in the original script, there were only like 3 lines to it. There was something like, I forget the names of the characters right now.
I don't remember their characters' name. I remember obviously the actors. I can't even think of the characters. I love that movie though. I just watched it not that long ago.
Okay, but yeah. Anyway, it would say something like they they enter the turnstile of the train station, they board the train, and they have passionate sex. Something as general as that.
Yeah.
And when you're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Like, how are you gonna show passionate sex on the train, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think because of the restrictions of time and everything else, what he had shot didn't fulfill that promise. But he had shot a bunch of second unit stuff of what we call train buys, which just showed the elevated train in Chicago, just kind of going in and out of frame, coming in and out of frame, of different sizes, different trains, different angles. And it occurred to me that because Paul was still on location and I was working in West Hollywood, that maybe what we needed to do was to construct a visual equivalence of the sexual climax.
Mm-hmm.
So if we had a visual equivalence of that, because then we could feel it, and then we just need to redo what leads up to that. So I put together a little visual climax of these trains crisscrossing that kind of built up in speed. And also I would skip frame some of it and speed it up. And it kind of felt, in a way, kind of sexual. The way when I first put it together. And so when those guys finished shooting, they came back and I showed them that along with the rest of my first cut of the picture.
Mm-hmm.
And I suggested, what we need is really a build-up to this, because I think what we have that we had initially shot doesn't quite work, but maybe we can keep this last part that has a feeling of a visual climax to be erotic. So we could do, maybe if we had time and the budget, you could kind of redo the first part. So that's what happened. We built this, that in the cutting room, we were still working in film. And Paul, having been more of a screenwriter before, and not knowing the kind of tools that you could use in editing to construct a reality, construct by rhythm, by frame rate, by different and what music you choose, what you could do. So it turned out he had to reshoot some other scenes or shoot some additional scenes to explain the role of the pimp in it. And so some additional scenes. So he did go back for one night to shoot on the train, the elevated train in Chicago, the scene between Rebecca De Marais and the Tom Cruise scene on the train. And when it came back and we started to put that together, we realized also, although he had a whole buildup to how they could be alone, because the way that he had conceived it originally in the script, somehow it skipped from their going through the turnstile of the train station and they're on the train doing it. And it was kind of like there's no buildup. And so he wrote in new scenes of how the train when this couple got on it was full of people, and then the buildup was how to peel back the people from the train until they were finally alone. So it was really,
as I say, that scene really becomes the foreplay of that encounter. It really, that slow build and watch it, that's really what that is. And that's so cool how that came together. That's amazing.
Because we did it kind of backwards, in the editing room, we came up with the end, and then how are you going to get to the end? So it's really a great example of how sometimes editing can help you reconstruct something, and then you can go back and do the lead in to it, So even when we shot the early, and we started working with it, I started fooling around because on film, the chem, there's a little real stat control where you could kind of like slow down the frame rate instead of running at the normal 24 frames. You run it at 12 frames or 2 frames. And we started to kind of fool around with that. And he kind of liked the idea, and I suggested, like, why don't we reprint some of this stuff and skip frame some of this and multiple frame some of this, so that, again, once they're alone, because there's a shot that he had where they're just facing each other. So by the time Rebecca sits on his lap, let's kind of make it a moment by how we can change the feeling of time, so it gets suspended. The seduction is the whole thing is suspended in time, and until we get to the end. So we were kind of playing both ends from the beginning toward the middle and all that, and it turns out that the shot, the takes that Paul really liked were the same profile 2 shot of Rebecca sitting on Tom Cruise's lap.
Yeah.
And there were from several different takes where how they came up to the act.
Yeah.
And how we were going to connect this, because, at that time we didn't want to ruin the moment by having jump cuts in it, because it would really look like a cheat, if you have jump cuts from the beginning to foreplay into the climax. So it occurred to me that earlier in the train, the actual train, because of how the lines work, when the electrodes of the train would change lines, the lights would go out momentarily. So I use that idea to put really short frame of 2 to 4 frame fade outs and fade ins to connect these 2 shots, which were from different takes. So to avoid or to hide the jump cuts that were different takes, and putting in the fade outs and fade ins, it just kind of looked like the train was doing what it had done before with switching lines. So the fade out, fade in would also not only hide it, but it kind of give it a little more of a eroticism. So between frame rates, putting in fades and all that, it gave then a whole visual kind of eroticism, to the scene.
Yeah.
So that was just the visual parts. And at that time, I found that another thing that really helped when you work with a director is you have a similar taste in music.
Yeah.
I was very specific in music choices, and he had written into the script some specific music. Although, especially some of the pop songs, like "In the Air Tonight," the Phil Collins piece, that was the first part of the train sequence.
Yeah.
But we didn't have anything that was for like the lead up to it. We didn't have anything for when Tom and Rebecca were on the train by themselves. So at that time, both Paul and I independently were listening to this minimalist composer, Steve Reich. And what was really kind of popular, it's actually from the 60s. I shouldn't say popular, but for these music snobs, we would listen to music for 18 musicians, or some of these kind of very esoteric compositions from Steve Reich that were really minimalist, because it was just their loops, rhythm loops, just percussion. But they were mesmerizing and erotic when you play them out, because there was this kind of this motion. So that's what I was playing, and I forgot if I suggested it because I was listening to that at home. So I suggested that the 35 millimeter film, and we would play that. But we realized that although it had that feeling, it wasn't perhaps layered enough. So one of my assistants, Albert Coleman, was in the next room down the hall, and he had a boom box, and he was constantly playing music. And he was playing Tangerine Dream one day, and we didn't even know that was Tangerine Dream. This was 1983, 1982. Somewhere that, and Albert had very exotic and eclectic taste, and he would be playing all kinds of stuff. And we heard that from down the hall, and Paul says, "What is that?" I said, "I don't know. Let's ask Albert. Albert, what are you playing?" He said, "Oh, this is some Tangerine Dream." "Oh yeah? What's the name of that cut?" I forget what it was. So he had that on a cassette tape. So we just had that transferred to 35 millimeter magnetic film, and we layered that in,
Oh,
and
wow.
it started to work much better because it had layers, more
Yeah.
layers than the Steve Reich stuff. Steve Reich was more kind of up here,
Mhm.
and Tangerine was more like down here, you know.
Uh,
So that's how it built to the point where John Avnet, the producer, got the budget for those two and the music editor to go to Hamburg to record actually Tangerine Dream in their studio, and they produced more tracks for our picture because they loved the picture, and that's how that kind of originated, was from something we listened to from what an assistant editor was playing from down the hall that led
wow.
to their recording, in Hamburg in the Tangerine Dream studio, the
God,
track that they did for Risky Business.
that's amazing.
Long story.
That's incredible. Well, I know I have one listener who's gonna be really, really excited to hear that story because they were specifically asking about that. So that's phenomenal.
I guess I wanted to talk about this period of my editing career because I
Yeah.
started as a team member on the first three features. And as I had said previously, I had learned so much,
Yeah.
and that I was able to impart or impart some of this stuff that I learned in my later films when I was working by myself, because
Yeah.
it was then earlier it was my laboratory, and then later on I have a chance to do this because I was then working with directors who were less established than I was as an
Yeah.
editor.
Yeah.
So they were looking at me as the more experienced person to
Mhm.
bring something to the party, whereas before I was kind of coming into the kitchen of somebody who was already an established chef, right? And
Yeah.
now I'm kind of like the established chef in a way, so I could do that. So it led me to at least be able in the 1980s. For me, I had more of a chance to say yes, to choose
Yeah.
projects, because I frequently been asked, how do you feel as a successful film editor? And I feel like, well, what is success? I think success is being able to say no. So
Yeah.
that, because once you've done some pictures that get you on the map, that you have kind of a name value, you get offered a lot of work that I didn't necessarily connect with.
Yeah.
And because I was getting enough of offers, then I could say no. And to be able to say no is,
Yeah.
I think, a great place to be.
Oh yeah.
And it got me into the 80s where I could say no, and I could. I mean, and I have to say, I didn't. I probably said no to the wrong projects because I said yes to certain things and said no to other things, and the things I said no to, those films at least got more box office, than the ones I said yes to, because I think maybe my taste tend to run more esoteric and not as popular and not as commercial. And the
But at
ones I
the
said no to, were very popular and had a lot of appeal. So,
I
who knows?
I feel like there's a huge value in you doing it your way, though. You went out, you did the big pictures that got the awards and the accolades. You got that Oscar way early on, and so you hit that, the heights of what they tell you you're supposed to want to do, and then you got to spend the rest of it, not having to worry about, are you going to win that award? Are you going to make that box office? Are you going to? You've kind of already did that. You kind of already proved yourself and had a lot of chances to just say, no, I want to do what I want to
So,
do.
it allowed me in the second part of the 80s, I was able to choose projects that dealt with thematic material that mattered to me. One was a picture called Clean and Sober about a guy with an abuse problem, a substance abuse problem, played by Michael Keaton. And, because in the 80s, there were so many drugs that were acceptable that were seen as commonplace, so I felt that film, Clean and Sober, was really something that I wanted to work on for the story of how people were affected by this. So that, and then I got a repeat performance with Paul Brickman in a second movie called Men Don't Leave, because it dealt with Jessica Lange playing a widowed mother trying to raise two young sons and having to go out to work for the first time to try to support the two boys. And to me, that's a dilemma. That story, I wanted to work on being able to tell that story, because I knew that was, endemic to so many families, that to be able to tell it in the way that Paul told it, which had so many other subplots about what would happen to the teenage son who is just finding his kind of his sexual life and gets seduced by an older woman, and then the younger boy get into trouble with porn, and it's had so Brickman world is like, from Risky Business to Men Don't Leave, and unfortunately that didn't get the audience that I felt that it deserved, but it wasn't like a big splashy movie, and I think it kind of got lost in the shuffle.
Yeah. At the same time, it's really interesting. When we talked a couple weeks ago, and you spoke about the going out into the forests and the jungles and doing the documentary filmmaking and all that, all of those movies were these similar pursuits, and that they were stories no one else was telling, about people no one else were talking about, or ideas no one else was talking about. And it seems like you really kind of just circled right back around to that as soon as you got the reins in your hands. So that I was going to ask you, if you went back, with the yeses and the nos, would you have said yes to some of those bigger ones and no's to some of those smaller ones? I have a feeling I know the answer, but I'd certainly like to hear your take on, would you have said yes to some of them or no to others?
Yeah. Excuse me. In answer to your question, I think I would have made the same choices. I mean, it's hard to say. I don't want to be the kind of person to say, like, I should have done that because I could have made much more money, because I'm not that sort of person. I mean, you go with your values. And to me, having good values are more important than maybe living well. And I think after, coming to Hollywood and seeing what some of my peers have done, is explain why I think a lot of bad movies are made, is because you live in a certain lifestyle that demands a certain income level, and then that limits your choices, because you might want to do, but it offers a payday that helps you support the lifestyle that you have been seduced by. Yeah. And I've never been, maybe because of my upbringing, I've never been seduced by a glamorous lifestyle that would then demand my having to feed the monster all the time. Feed the meter, you got to feed the meter, you got to feed the meter, and then you do stuff that you're not proud of. Yeah. Yeah. But that's not to say I have not made bad choices. I mean, I've made some choices that I wish I didn't do, but I did have to do it because of the circumstances in my life at that time. That man, I do need a job, so okay, I guess I'll do this. Yeah. The other factor that comes in, I think, for your audience that is beginning their career is, okay, sometimes you make a choice based on the money it offers you, but then other times you make a choice based on the relationships that you want to preserve. Yeah. And you don't want to say no to some of these relationships, because that would destroy that relationship. Because, humans have a really long memory, and when you say no to somebody, they never come back to you again, which
Mm-hmm.
is bad for me because I've said no to people that have become quite prominent. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, they come back to me because I said no to them 5 years ago, 10
Of
years ago.
course. Yeah.
And then, of course, I've said yes to certain things that I wish I did not say yes to. And, then I'm saddled with that credit. And I think
Mm-hmm.
for anybody, you go down my credits and you can see, like, oh, I wonder what was happening in Richard's life at that time to cause him to choose to work on that movie. And
Certainly.
you don't apply that just to me. You can look at a lot of actors or other
Oh, yeah.
people, look at their credits in IMDb and you say, oh, he must have been undergoing a divorce then.
Absolutely. Oh my
Right?
God.
Right?
Yeah. Oh,
Or
no
he
question.
had to pay for rehab then.
Exactly. There are so many times where you can do that, learning more about it as someone's career and trace back their work and go, oh, yep, now I see why that. Oh, actors and musicians both, and we're very transparent people when it comes to
It's
those
so
for
visible.
exactly
Yeah.
the reasons you said. For exactly the reasons you said, people get used to a lifestyle and you got to feed the monster. One actor I actually respect a great deal for that is Will Smith, because he's never been shy about that. He's always fully admitted, I grew up a certain way and I didn't want that. And I didn't want that for my kids. So I went out and I made movies that would make me money and would give me that life. And, while I have more respect for the career of somebody who made the choices to do the pieces that spoke to them, I also have plenty of respect for somebody who's realistic to that fact, who at least is aware and owns it, Uh, but I'm with you, and I think that we lose something. I think that's actually something that's come into play in a lot of mainstream filmmaking overall. Exactly what you just said, where movie making, the invention of the blockbuster was a gift and a curse, because it created these incredible highs for movie making, but it then left a lot of filmmakers chasing them. And it almost feels like a lot of what gets put on the screens in America right now, the stuff that we're supposed to take home and show to our kids and our friends and our family, is just these recycled money grabs, so that certain people who've gotten used to a certain way of life can keep having that. I think we need more of you. I think we need more filmmakers like you who are willing to say no and say yes to the projects that that tell a real story. It's not to say those filmmakers aren't out there, but
Right. But I don't want to say that I'm like this highly moral,
I
disciplined
do.
person because what was I going to say? Oh, I think one of the things that kind of led me to do this was that sometimes I would not feel good about myself at the end of the day. At the end of a work day, and I'm going home, and I would feel like, oh man, why am I doing this? I didn't feel good about myself. And it had nothing to do with like being moral or not. I just kind of felt like it was kind of dumb, what I was doing. It's just, I didn't, and, so I didn't feel good about
Yeah.
what I had to go to bed feeling like I did that today. And I have to wake up tomorrow morning and go back and do the same thing. So I didn't want to have that feeling. I had a harder time with that than
Yeah.
to live in a lesser house or drive a lesser or older car, or,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
See, I think you don't give yourself enough credit sometimes. I've noticed that as a motif across all of our conversations thus far, is you not giving yourself enough credit for a lot of these things. And really, I mean, in this time talking to you, I've gotten to experience that and see that and really feel that you are a singular a filmmaker. You're a singular person in this world of movie making. In that, I mean, I've never spoken to anyone of your caliber, certainly not for this long, but I've had a couple of peeks into that, that world you talk about, the celebrities, mostly from catering and just waiting tables, and there are not a lot of people like you, even in the editor circle, who have this much perspective and humility and so much integrity about their work. I mean, really, there are plenty of editors who don't escape those traps of chasing the money, of chasing the highs, of chasing the awards, of wanting the accolades and all of that. And you really stand out as somebody who has stayed true to that. I mean, I think that's probably why I've so enjoyed is speaking to you. Is that something that really speaks to me a lot? Is a person who, no matter what, and no matter what it costs them, you are going to do what that inner voice tells you is right for you. Not as, again, I think that's so much part of it, is that there's no sense where you're out trying to change the world, or you think you're this grandiose agent of goodness, but you just are. You just wake up every day with this strong sense of what's right and what's wrong and what's good, and you go out and you try to make things that are good. And that I have infinite respect for.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, this has, again, certainly been my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to our final chapter of this discussion, which is going to really take us, it's going to be very reflective and take us through this whole journey of your career and all the pieces beyond as well. And we'll get into some theoreticals, some ideas of filmmaking and where it's going to go in the future. I'm really looking forward to that. So once again, thank you so much for all of your time, all of these incredible nuggets and stories. It was, you had me laughing from the moment we started. So cannot overstate how much I appreciate this. But until next time, that's all for today. I'm sure you guys enjoyed this as much as I did. But until then, God Empress.